opened your eyes slowly, wrapped in the suffocating gloom of the ancient tomb. The heavy silence here carried a weight that pressed against your chest, a quiet promise of danger, coiling around you like the creeping shadows. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly beneath a pale, muted sky, its empty vastness unsettled only by the distant, faint whispers of the wind. The air was dry, yet within this enclosed space, the damp smell of mold and cold stone clawed at your senses, creeping under your skin in slow, deliberate waves. Your fingers brushed over the rough surface of the pallet, its cold, solid texture grounding you in the moment. Every movement you made was careful, measured, a delicate dance of repetition. The brush trembled slightly in your grasp, a subtle pulse against the thick silence. Your eyes burned. The sting dulled only by the steady rhythm of your task, tracing deadly secrets onto the tomb's walls. The colors before you were faded, ochres and deep reds bleeding into streaks that seemed almost alive under your trembling hand. Each stroke felt eternal, dragging you deeper into the weight of unseen eyes watching from shadows. The faint echo of distant voices drifted through cracks in the stone, guardians, alert yet silent, their presence a reminder that a single misstep could seal your fate. You knew these images were more than mere decoration. They were a labyrinth of curses and warnings, centuries old, crafted to protect untold horrors from the light of the living world. A flicker of dry humor flickered in your mind. If today the mere thought of no battery sends people into panic, imagine the desperation of watching your last flame die in the cold dark of a tomb thousands of years ago. Your body ached under the weight of the worn cloak around your shoulders, its coarse fabric chafing with every movement. Every breath you took was careful, deliberate, trying to keep the pace slow, steady. The silence itself seemed to pulse with growing tension, the stillness broken only by the soft scrape of brush on stone, the whispered breath of air far away. You repeated the motion again, each line layered with care, each line a silent prayer not to awaken the sleeping danger etched in stone. Moments before, the sharp cessation of dog barks outside stirred your nerves. The usual cacophony, shift of posture among your unseen companions spoke volumes without sound. Something was awakening beyond these walls, something patient and bound by ancient will. Your heart hammered softly, yet you continued painting, your hands steady despite the cold sweat beading on your brow. Before you could allow yourself to be carried away by the rising tide of unease, your focus returned to the task. The slow, spiraling brushstrokes, the layered reds and ochres twisting into symbols obscured by time. Here, in this dim chamber, survival was measured in careful silence, and the relentless, unending work of keeping deadly secrets locked away. You leaned in, eyes tracing the next line, feeling the grain of the stone beneath the paint, and with it, the fragile thread holding you to life. Hey, before Morpheus takes you completely, quickly check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the next sleep stories. Take a moment and leave a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You steeled yourself, the slow scrape of the brush against stone, a fragile anchor in this unsettling stillness. The air pressed heavier now, as if the tomb itself was breathing in time with your careful movements. Each stroke a measured breath in an ancient ritual. Your fingers lingered briefly on the rough surface of the pigments. Cool and dusty, the faint gray shadows curling like whispered warnings trapped beneath the layers. Outside, the distant wind stirred faintly, carrying with it the dry scent of sand and cracked earth. You imagined the vast desert beyond these walls, endless and indifferent, the sun's weak light filtering through pale clouds. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the unmistakable scent of old stone and damp decay, mingled faintly with the bitter tang of something metallic, like rusted iron left to rot. It crept up your nostrils and settled deep, an oppressive reminder of how confined you were, the weight of centuries pressing down in every breath. Your hand moved again, slow and deliberate, a steady rhythm reflecting the quiet pounding of your heart. The brush trembled slightly, a delicate pulse, as your gaze traced the half-faded symbols winding along the cold walls. Felt like a tether, binding you to a purpose few had dared to understand. You repeated the motions that had become ritual, left to right, top to bottom, etching life back into colors worn thin by time. The silence was thick, almost tactile, broken only by the faint creak of your cloak as it shifted against the stone floor and the occasional, barely audible hiss of settling dust. Far beyond your immediate circle, the faintest hint of movement flickered at the edges of your vision, a shadow dancing just out of reach. Your breath caught momentarily, your senses sharpened, but no sound came to confirm the presence. Only the subtle changing of light shifting with the flicker of a distant flame, perhaps a reflection, or the shifting sands far outside the tomb's narrow entrance. You pressed forward, steadying your nerves with the comforting weight of the palette in your hand, the repeated brushstrokes folding into a slow chant of survival. The memory of the dog's sudden silence from before lingered, a sudden void that felt as heavy as the stones surrounding you. You pictured their barks fading into nothing, swallowed of angular symbols. The surface beneath the paint was rough, uneven, fractured by tiny hairline cracks that mapped centuries of neglect beneath your careful hands. You traced one intricate curve again and again, feeling the whisper of dust against your skin, the subtle roughness like the memory of scraped flesh beneath bandages. Time itself seemed to stretch here, seconds folding softly into one another, the silence expanding like a living thing. The cloak around your shoulders grew heavier with every movement. Against stone returned an answer. Outside, the desert's pale light was ebbing, the sky folding into a soft gradient of faded blues and muted grays. You imagined the cold settling in, a creeping shadow mirroring the one poised to awake beyond these ancient walls. The silence deepened, no longer just an absence of sound, but a presence, thick and watching. Your pulse slowed into a steady thrum, matching the deliberate pace of your work. You reached out again, fingertips brushing over the cool palette as the colors blurred slowly. You savored the tiny grain of pigment catching at your skin, the faint pulse of coolness that traveled from your hand up your arm like a quiet whisper. The symbols before you began to take on new form, a language only half remembered, warnings folded into curses, carved to outlast the ages. Your mouth went dry at the thought of what lay hidden beneath the paint, the secret you carefully concealed in every repeated stroke. For a moment, a flicker of warmth touched your spine, a sliver of hope threading through the shadows as your gaze drifted upward. Pale light filtered through a chink in the stone, narrow and fragile. It moved with the shifting sands outside, casting a trembling line across the wall. In that fleeting shaft of sunlight, you saw the ochres glow gently, the reds deepen to a molten hue, and you allowed yourself a sliver of calm. But the stillness stretched taut once more, tightening like a drawn bow. The whispered murmurs returned, threading softly through cracks in the stone. You swallowed the dry ache in your throat and bent closer to the wall, brush poised for next line, a slow, deliberate spiral coiling outward. Your eyes traced the form carefully, the weight of unseen eyes growing heavier with each stroke. And then, from somewhere deep in the tomb's shadowed heart, a faint breath stirred, a slow exhalation, not your own. It slipped across the stone like a silk thread pulled taut, as if the darkness itself had awakened just enough to watch and wait. You noticed the faint breath again, a whisper not entirely of your own making, curling softly against the cold stone like a silk thread pulled taut in the dark. Your hand halted mid-stroke, the bristles of the brush hovering just above the ochres and reds that clung stubbornly to the rough surface. The whisper seemed to vibrate through the air, heavy and patient, as if the tomb itself was listening and waiting alongside you. The coldness of the stone seeped through the palette cradled in your palm, grounding you even as your pulse stuttered. Your eyes, already burning from the dim light, refocused on a fragment of a faded symbol that twisted into a delicate spiral beneath your brush. Each curve you traced echoed the lingering breath, slow and unyielding, a silent pulse threading through the thick, stale air. The scent of damp earth, mingled with the sharp tang of rusted metal, hovered close, wrapping around your senses like a shroud. You shifted your weight carefully, feeling the sleeves of your cloak rub against the cracked floor, the coarse fibers pricking your exposed skin where the fabric had begun to fray. Every movement seemed amplified. The soft scrape of the brush, the faint rustle of cloth, your own slowed breaths measured against the seemingly infinite silence. Outside the narrow entrance, the desert was swallowing the last light, the pale sky folding into twilight shades of ash and faded blue. A distant wind whispered faintly, its ghostly sound threading through the sealed chamber's cracks, carrying with it the grainy scent of dry sand. Your fingers flicked once more, tracing the same curve of the symbol again, as if repeating the motion might steady your spiraling thoughts. The paint, thick and uneven, felt cold beneath your touch, a fragile barrier between life and the unknown lurking just beyond the walls. The faintest movement flickered at the corner of your vision, a shadow, subtle and slipping, as if trying to dissolve at the very instant you noticed it. You held your breath, heart tightening, but the shadow retreated as silently as it had appeared, flickering like the dying embers of a fire long forgotten. The breath you sensed came again, slower now, a deliberate exhalation that seemed to ripple through the stone itself. You swallowed a dry lump in your throat and leaned closer, the cracked wall rough against your cheek. The spiraling symbols wound around one another like coiled snakes, their meaning buried beneath layers of time and silence. You repeated your brushstrokes slowly, attentively, weaving color into shapes that had resisted the passing ages. The damp chill pressed against your skin, creeping beneath your cloak and settling like a cold weight on your shoulders. You pulled the fabric up, just enough to shield your neck, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of your surroundings. A faint creak echoed somewhere behind you, soft and unwelcome. Your breath faltered again. You listened, but the sound was swallowed whole by the deep silence that stretched between each heartbeat. At that moment, your hand paused over the pigment, as a distant echo drifted through the labyrinthine halls, a low murmur, unintelligible, but threaded with purpose. It slid over the stone floors and through narrow corridors, a restless whisper that seemed to stir the very air. You pictured the guardians, statues cast in shadow and stone, their unblinking eyes fixed beyond the veil of darkness. A cold wave washed over your spine, a reminder that the past remained alive here, watching, waiting for the faintest crack in your resolve. Your brush moved again, each stroke a slow, deliberate chant to the tomb's ancient will. The ochres deepened, the reds glowing faintly, like dying coals under your trembling hand. A sudden draft curled around your legs, subtle but chilling, carrying with it the faint, almost sweet scent of something long decayed. You blinked, the dark edges of your vision flickering once more with that elusive movement, a shadow no longer content to merely watch, but shifting closer. As the twilight outside bled further into the tomb, the light filtering through a tiny crevice caught the dust hanging in the air. Particles drifted lazily, like ash caught in a slow eddy, glowing softly with the last breath of day. For a moment, your chest expanded with a flicker of calm, a fragile flame against the weight of dread pressing in from all sides. Then, as if drawn by some unseen thread, your gaze lifted toward the narrow slit of opening. Just beyond, the desert wind had stirred anew. The shifting sands beckoned faintly in the fading light, but deeper still was the echo of a presence, patient, waiting, as ancient and relentless as the tomb itself. The whispered breath brushed past you again, this time colder, closer, and you felt it press against the fragile thread tethering you to this moment. Your hand trembled slightly as you steadied the brush, fingers brushing color onto the rough stone with slow, trembling certainty. The pattern you traced began to take on a new life, lines intertwining into a language half remembered, carved by those who had learned to whisper with shadows and secrets. Then a sudden weight settled in the air, heavier than before, near enough now that you could almost sense the cold breath against your skin. Your heartbeat slowed, each thump a steady drum beneath the pounding silence. The final strokes of your brush hovered, poised between revealing and concealing. And then, just as a faint clatter echoed somewhere deep in the tomb's heart, a dark shape began to materialize in the farthest corner of your vision, silent, coiling, and watching with eyes unseen. You froze at the barest hint of movement, the way the shadow shifted, coiling just at the edge of your vision. Like smoke caught in a final breath, your hand lingered, brush poised above the rough stone, as the cold air seemed to thicken, pressing close with the weight of forgotten ages. The silence folded around you again, sharp and deep, the fragile calm before something unseen stirred in the depths. Your eyes strained in the dim light, the flickering glow from the narrow crevice outside, casting trembling patterns that danced slowly across the aching reds and ochres you traced. There was a heaviness here now, unmistakable and slow, wrapping around your shoulders like the worn cloak whose fibers whispered with every subtle shift. You could almost feel the history beneath your skin, the countless hands that had painted these walls, each stroke a tether between life and oblivion, a heartbeat in stone. Your breath caught shallow and careful, a tentative rhythm to match the slow scraping of bristles on rough pigment. Outside, the desert's breath shifted, carrying a faint, whirling dust that scraped the edges of the tomb's narrow mouth before retreating into the chill. The air around you was cold enough to taste, crisp with the musty scent of dry earth and rusting metal, folding slowly like distant thunder. Waiting to break, a fragile bead of sweat traced a cold line down your temple, cooling against the stubborn heat pooling in your palms. Your fingers curled tighter around the pallet, grounding you as the whispers seemed to gather, distant murmurs that echoed faintly between the fractured stones. You traced the symbol again, slow and deliberate, curves folding back on themselves, a spiral coiling toward an unspoken center. Each repeat became a mantra, a slow chant that tethered you firmly to the moment. The roughness beneath the brush glided unevenly, a stubborn grain in the otherwise smooth spiral. Your eyes caught the faint shimmer of dust, disturbed with every stroke, particles drifting lazily in the fragile shaft of twilight spilling through the slit above. The shadow flickered once more, now stronger, slipping with subtle certainty along the corner where darkness pooled deepest. Your heart thudded quietly beneath the stillness, a slow rhythm beating against the stone floor, measured and unyielding. The weight in the air pressed harder. Unseen eyes seemed to draw nearer, their presence a heavy breath against the nape of your neck. You fought the urge to turn, knowing the silence itself was your only shield. The faded reds deepened under your careful hand, the ochres warming as if catching faint embers trapped within their layers. The scent of cold stone mingled with faint traces of something ancient. An iron tang carried faintly on a cool draft that curled unexpectedly around your ankles. Your cloak, coarse and worn, shifted softly as you adjusted your stance, trying not to disturb the slow chant of invisible watchers. A distant murmur threaded through the labyrinth beyond, soft, deliberate, as if the stones themselves breathed a language older than memory. It draped the air in quiet tension, weaving a fabric of unease that spread slowly, thickening the stillness with each passing heartbeat. You took another breath, careful to make it slow, even, matching the steady scrape of the brush that seemed to beat in tandem with your pulse. As your fingers brushed the palette once more, you felt the rough granules crumble faintly beneath your skin, cool and tactile, a fragile connection to the world outside this suffocating dark. The symbols replied, shifting subtly beneath your brush as layers of meaning began to resurface. Warnings folded into ancient curses, their silent power vibrating just beneath the surface. Your throat tightened at the fragile edge between past and present. The delicate thread of life stretched thin within these stone walls, For a moment, a ripple of warmth pulsed from the shaft of light above, soft and fleeting. A single line of sun tracing the curve of your work, like a gentle flame against creeping shadows. You let yourself sink briefly into that fragile calm, a tender moment amidst the creeping weight. The cool air brushed your neck as you leaned closer, eyes tracing the spiral's edge with reverence, feeling the texture of worn stone gritty against your cheek. Then, without warning, the faint clatter echoed again, softer this time, a whispered drop somewhere deep in the cavern. Your breath stalled, the brush trembling lightly in your grip as the shadow shifted again, long and low, curling into view with patient intent. You felt the darkness coil slowly, a living thing aware, watching from a distance too close to ignore. The presence was neither rush nor roar, but a quiet, deliberate unfolding, an ancient patience bound tight in endless wait. Your heartbeat slowed, steadying into a deep drum beneath the silence. The symbols you painted seemed to glow faintly now, their forms sharper, etched with a purpose beyond your grasp. The ochres cooled, the reds deepened further into a molten hush, coloring the stone like the slow bleed of dusk. A sudden breeze whispered through the chamber, twisting softly around your ankles, carrying with it a faint scent, a dry, almost sweet decay that fluttered like a ghost's breath. The faint flicker of movement shimmered once more, closer this time, not quite solid, an edge of shadow dissolving and gathering, like smoke caught in a still breeze. You swallowed the dry lump in your throat, your skin prickling with the weight of suspended, caught between the final strokes yet to be made and the shadow waiting silently in the hollow depths. The air hummed with the tension of something ancient, stirring, patient and unyielding. And in that frozen moment, the darkness behind you shifted, slowly revealing a pair of faint, glowing eyes, watching, waiting for you to blink first. Your breath calmed, slow and deliberate, building a fragile rhythm against the suffocating silence. The shadow lingered just beyond your gaze, a faint coil in the gloom, motionless yet heavy with presence, as if the tomb itself exhaled through the dark, waiting for you to blink first. Every syllable of sound seemed swallowed by thick stone, save for the whisper of your own heart, insisting on survival. Your fingers tightened around the brush, the bristles soft but insistent, grounding you in. This moment suspended between patience and alertness. The ochres and reds beneath your hand pulsed quietly, colors deepening as if awakening alongside the unseen watchers. The rough texture of the stone pressed into your palm, cool and granular, a tactile reminder of the countless hands that had dragged this story across centuries, a tapestry of warnings folded into frail spirals. Outside, the desert light retreated further, leaving only a muted twilight. The air carried a faint scent of dry dust and cracked earth, fragile as the bones of the past, resting just beyond this ancient threshold. A breath of wind slipped quietly through distant crevices, threading itself like a subdued hymn through the musty chamber. A subtle caress against the damp stone. The scent of rust and forgotten iron mingled with the stale chill, wrapping your lungs. In a cold embrace that settled deep, a weight pressing closer with every slow movement. Your eyes traced the familiar curve once more, each spiral carved by fingers long gone, each stroke a gentle binding tether between you and the tomb's cold heart. Time felt fractured here, folding into itself as seconds stretched and slowed, the silence thickening to a palpable presence around you. The cloak's coarse fibers shifted against your skin again. An itch beneath your neck you resisted with measured patience. You adjusted only slightly, careful not to breathe too heavily, your every motion tempered in that intimate balance between stillness and necessity. A soft scrape of shifting stones whispered from the farthest corners. You held still, brush poised in midair, listening as the once distant murmurs crept closer. The walls. The faintest movement flickered nearby, a dance of shadows dissolving and coalescing into shapes just barely grasped by your peripheral vision. Your heartbeat accelerated, yet remained a steady drum, matching the slow etching in front of you, a silent chant of survival in crimson and yellow. The ochres warmed beneath your hand, glowing faintly as if touched by a dying ember's breath. The reds curled in slow flames, hesitant but unyielding, a flicker of light swallowing the dark. Despite the gathering weight around you, a brief warmth unfurled like a whispered promise, fragile yet resolute, a slender thread of hope woven into the heavy tapestry of fear. Pressure settled as a delicate draft skated across your ankles, carrying with it a scent oddly sweet, decay folded gently into earth, a subtle reminder of life slowly shifting beneath stone silence. The shadow edged closer, folding patiently into form, neither rushing nor retreating, watching with unblinking eyes that you could almost feel against your skin. Your brush dipped once more, the bristles dragging slowly, deliberately over cracked surfaces. A slow pulse, a measured breath in stone. Each line deepened, twisting toward an unseen center where meaning begged to surface in the glow of failing light. You could almost hear the faint whispers of that language, quiet murmurs of warning, curses wrapped in coils of pigment and dust, their ancient power settling just beneath the fragile surface. The soft echo of a distant, barely audible sound stirred the air, a gentle clink of something falling far away, swallowed almost immediately into silence. Your breath caught carefully as your gaze snapped to the entrance, where a fractured sliver of twilight lingered thin and fragile. Dust particles drifted lazily, caught in a slow spiral of light, glowing like tiny embers caught in a dying fire. You leaned forward, feeling the rough stone graze your cheek, the subtle grit a sting amid the cool quiet enveloping you. The tapestry on the walls seemed to pulse faintly, their colors deepening in response to the dying light, folding shadows into whispers. Your fingertips brushed the worn edges of your palette, fingers trembling slightly, the cool roughness grounding you against the rising tide of anticipation pressing against your skin. Suddenly, a breath colder than before brushed past your neck, faint but undeniable, a slow exhalation slipping through the chamber like silk undone, stirring hairs with icy fingers. Your heart tightened, steady and deepening, as the shadow moved again, no longer distant, but curling closer, a living murmur inked in darkness. The cold wash of the tomb settled like a thick hunger, pressing into your senses, sharpening awareness to every scrape of fabric, every granular breath traced through the stale air. The ochres and reds before you began to mingle with a subtle glow, as if the walls themselves breathed color, marking the slow passage of a reverent ritual unbroken since eternity. You paused, brush poised with care, suspended between creation and concealment, feeling the delicate thread of life draped thinly beneath the surface of worn stone. The whispers gathered low, stretching through the labyrinthine halls beyond, slow and deliberate murmurs crossing unseen thresholds. The shadow materialized with quiet intent, weaving close like the curling wind at dusk, its indistinct shape coiling patiently, watching your every stroke in mute communion. A pulse of primal understanding brushed your spine. The tomb's guardians were not mere statues, but something waiting, beyond sight, older than memory. Outside, the desert's last light folded into endless charcoal, swallowing the horizon whole. Inside, the chamber's brittle calm cracked ever so slightly as the whispered breath deepened, drawing slow, long, deliberate, a presence neither friend nor foe, but undeniably alive. And then the dark behind you shifted with measured weight, revealing not a shadow, but a pair of luminous eyes, faint and glowing, locked in silent challenge, waiting for you to blink first. You remained perfectly still, the faint glow of those unblinking eyes burning quietly in the darkness behind you. The air seemed to thicken, pressing close to your skin. The brush hovered, suspended in trembling hesitation above the ancient pigments, as if the very stone beneath you breathed a slow, deliberate warning. You swallowed hard, each inhale a fragile thread in the tapestry of silence, the cold creeping steadily beneath your cloak and settling like a shroud across your shoulders. The ochres glowed softly where your brush had rested moments before, their muted warmth a pale echo against the chilling presence behind you. You could feel the rough stone floor beneath your boots, cool and uneven, grounding you even as your heart struggled for steady rhythm. The faint rumble of distant wind teased the narrow slits of the tomb's entrance, a wispy sound carrying with it the dry scent of cracked earth and shifting sand. It wound through the chamber like a ghostly caress, wrapping the stale air in invisible fingers. Your fingers grasped the pallet once more, the rough grains brushing cold against your skin, grounding you in the tangible world as your breath pressed shallow. Slowly, deliberately, you turned, only enough to catch the faintest outline of the shadow coiled quietly in the room's deepest corner. It was more than a darkness, a shifting presence, a patient, ancient watcher veiled in silence. The unblinking eyes glowed faintly, deep pools of stillness that seemed to crawl along the edges of your vision. Cold as stone and endless as the desert stretching beyond, the brush touched the wall again, dragging softly over the cracked surface, the faint grit rasping beneath in a slow, hypnotic pulse. Each stroke was a whisper, a fragile conversation with the past, etched in layers of dust and pigment. The spirals deepened, the reds melting into ochres like embers fading under a thick, eternal dusk. Your fingers traced the worn edges of symbols, half swallowed by time, the silent language braiding a delicate thread between your breath and the hollow dark. The sudden, subtle shift in the tomb's breath sent a chill rippling along your spine. The shadows stirred, coiling tighter, an almost imperceptible movement that teased your peripheral sight. The ancient watcher held its patience as a frail, resonant tension filled the air. A heavy pulse, etched in silence, deeper than stone. The damp scent of earth and rust swirled with a faintly sweet decay, carried on a breath colder than any desert night. The fabric of your cloak rasped softly as you shifted your weight, careful to disturb neither dust nor watcher. Your eyes peeled slowly over the space, linking the faded colors on the wall to the cold granite beneath each careful mark. The faint glow of the pigments stirred faint embers of hope, a quiet warmth flickering against the otherwise unyielding chill. Somewhere beyond the narrow entrance, the desert sunk further into twilight, the pale sky folding into tones of slate and faded blue, mirroring the slow dark that cloaked the tomb's interior. Again, your hand moved, the brush weaving color through worn grooves with painstaking patience. Each layer of pigment carried the weight of ancient warnings, curses locked away beneath shifting spirals and faded markings. The rough texture bit gently into your fingers, every grain of the pigment a reminder of the centuries pressing down, a slow, unending hum beneath your deliberate strokes. You felt the monument's gaze penetrate, silent but unrelenting, threading close around your senses like a shroud. Out of the corner of your eye, the shadow stretched just enough to catch your breath, a subtle curve of darkness, moving with unnatural grace. You resisted the impulse to turn fully, steadying yourself with measured, breath-held calm. The silence turned thick, almost tactile, as if the air itself had crystallized into fragile glass. You move the brush again, slow and reverent, coaxing the colors into life on the cold wall, fighting the steady ebb of creeping unease. The scent of dry sand mingled with the faintest trace of metal and decayed leaves, curling into your nostrils with a ghostly caress that held the tomb's secrets like a lingering sigh. Your gaze drifted upward just enough to catch a thin line of pale light, narrow crack, its slender beam falling across the painted spiral with tender inevitability. That shard of light glowed faintly against the ochres, infusing the reds below with a fragile brilliance, like the last warmth of a dying ember in the throat of night. Caught in that moment, the pressing weight of hidden eyes felt almost comforting, a silent company in the suffocating dark. Your breath slowed, the rhythm of your heart folding into the slow scrape of brush on stone. A pulse measured against the endless stillness. The ancient warnings whispered on your skin, each symbol another guardian holding the line between shadow and light. Suddenly, a subtle shift convulsed the faint breath moving through the chamber. A barely audible scrape, like stone reluctant to surrender its secrets. The shadow wavered, unfurling slightly in the dimmest flicker of light, no longer content to merely watch, but inching ever nearer in patient silence. Your skin prickled as a thin, unexpected draft curled upward, delicate and icy, carrying a sharper whisper of decay intertwined with dry sand. The brush froze mid-stroke, teetering between worlds, the restless watcher coiling patiently, its bright gaze fixed with silent insistence. You felt the tremor of ancient will threading to fall. The faint glow of those eyes remained fixed upon you, unwavering and patient, a quiet presence in the roiling shadows that clung like cobwebs to the chamber's cold stones. Your breath budged slowly, intentionally, each inhale a thread woven carefully into the fabric of silence, wrapping the long-forgotten tomb. The brush, suspended in your trembling hand, felt heavier now, as if pulled by a force older than your own will, an ancient tether binding you once more to a work not entirely your own. You circled your gaze slowly, enough to glimpse the contours of the shadowed shape lurking deeper within the gloom. It breathed darker than the darkness itself, an absence threading itself carefully between patches of gloom and crumbling granite. You sensed it, not by sight alone, but by the subtle distortion of the air, the way a hidden draft slid with unnatural quiet around your ankles and up your back. The chamber seemed to pulse, slow and deliberate, as if the stone and shadow shared a secret rhythm only you were allowed to hear. Your fingers tightened their grip on the palette, feeling the rough edges of pigment crumble with each slight press, a tiny cold grain falling like dust from forgotten pages. The ochres and reds by your side began to shimmer faintly under the fragile beam of waning twilight, which swept through a narrow crack in the wall, casting fragments of dying light across your work. Each slow brushstroke was a whispered renewal of the tomb's ancient warnings, curling around your fingers and settling beneath your skin like a protective pulse. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of earth and rust, mingling with an intangible sharpness like iron sharpened on stone. It twined around you, haunting and familiar, a reminder of the countless hands that had traced these spirals long before your own. Your hand moved with absolute care, the bristles pulling slowly, rhythmically, dragging color back into symbols worn thin by centuries of silence. You felt the cold grit of stone beneath the paint, rough and brittle, a texture as tangible as the breath creeping closer from the shadow behind. A sudden stillness settled deep within the chamber, and the faint echo of a distant stone shifting whispered through the hollow air. Your breath caught, poised at the delicate edge of awareness. The shadow stilled, stretching longer, a quiet ribbon of darkness curling tighter as if coiling patiently for a moment yet unseen. The weight of those luminous eyes was no longer distant, but poised close enough to brush against your skin like a cool exhale. A shiver slid down your spine, slow but unmistakable, threading doubt through the careful calm you wielded. Outside, waves of desert chill brushed faintly against the narrowing mouth of the tomb, carrying whispers from the sand beyond. The air was thinner now, colder, folding around your shoulders like a ghostly fabric, worn thin. More, a slight warmth bloomed amid the fading hues, a subtle ember glowing beneath the surface, as if the tomb's memory was stirring alongside you, communicating in muted pulses through the very colors you restored. A fragile breath floated past the world's edge, touching your cheek with a whisper of decay, sweetened by ancient dust. The shadow moved again, closer but without haste, folding quietly into itself, like smoke caught in a gentle draft. Your heart slowed, a deep drum beneath the crushing stillness, steadying your hands as the brush pressed lightly, irrevocably, into the roughened stone. Suddenly, a faint metallic clink echoed somewhere past the labyrinthine corridors, a sound so soft it might have been the settling of stone or the sigh of the tomb exhaling secrets. Your head turned just enough to catch the barest shift of movement at the corner of your vision. The shadow had loosened its coil, now exposed as a sinuous form that hovered silently between light and dark, waiting patiently, like a question unanswered. Your breath became an even cadence, slow and reverent, matching the deliberate scrape of brush on stone. A ritual performed again and again to hold the fragile thread of existence in place. The pigment blossomed in reluctant luminosity, reds deepening into molten hues as ochres glowed faintly, the colors folding into each other like dusk deepening the horizon beyond the tomb's narrow slit. The air thickened with the scent of dry sand and faint traces of cold iron, mingled with the sweet tang of earth long buried. Your fingers brush the palette once more, feeling the coarse pigment crumble softly like brittle leaves. The twilight outside ebbed further into charcoal, shadows folding inward with the slow certainty of nightfall. A distant wind stirred the surface of desert sands, carrying the hushed breath of an unseen watcher waiting on the threshold, a presence as patient and relentless as time itself. And then, just as your final stroke began to settle into place, the shadow behind you shifted with deliberate weight, no longer merely a form in the dark, but a silhouette emerging with the slow inevitability of a stone carving unveiled after eons. The faint glow of eyes deepened, casting a luminous thread across the hollow room as the watcher leaned forward, silent and intent, holding you in a gaze as old and vast as the desert night waiting beyond the walls. You froze in that suspended moment, caught between the whispered language of pigment and stone and the living shadow that now stepped forward softly, poised on the knife edge of revelation, waiting for the first word of a silent conversation to begin. You remained frozen, the faint glow of those luminous eyes weaving through the shadows behind you, unblinking and patient. The air around you thickened, carrying a sluggish weight, as if the tomb itself held its breath, pressing against your skin with the cold insistence of stone slowly settling after centuries. Your heart pulsed in quiet rhythm, the brush still poised above the cracked pigments, a fragile lifeline tethering you to the realm of the living. A soft scrape echoed somewhere at the chamber's edge, barely audible but distinct, and your breath caught in your throat. The scent of damp earth curled up around you anew, edged with the faint metallic trace that lingered like rusted memories. Every fiber of your coarse cloak seemed alive to the slightest movement, the fabric whispering as you shifted your weight with painstaking care. Your fingers tightened around the palette, the rough granules biting gently into your palm, a cold anchor against the tides of unseen presence. The ochres glimmered softly beneath your trembling brush, the reds deepening into molten pools, as if they harbored secret fires breathing beneath the stone's surface. With deliberate slowness, you traced the familiar spiral once more, each curve a subtle negotiation between caution and necessity. The faint whisper, threading through the darkness, seemed to pulse alongside your strokes. A silent chant, binding your breath to the weighty history enfolded in these walls. Outside, the last light faded steadily. A chill descended, brushing across the tomb's narrow mouth like a quiet sigh from the shifting desert. The air grew crisp, the fading scent of dry sand melding with the close presence of decay. A delicate, almost sweet rot pressing quietly upon your senses. You leaned in, feeling the rough stone graze the side of your cheek, the grains gritty and real. A tactile reminder of your fragile hold on this ancient place. A shadow twined closer at the corner of your vision, slender and slow, moving not with haste, but deliberate patience. Your breath wavered for just an instant, steadying with the faintest drawing in of colder air, a ribbon of chill curling languidly around your ankles. Still, you dared not turn fully toward the presence, holding your gaze fixed on the painted spiral that seemed to shimmer with quiet life beneath the last glimmers of light. The chamber hummed with low murmurs, not words, but the subtle resonance of untold stories, folded into stone and pigment. Your brush continued its slow, grinding rhythm, the movement both ritual and refuge. Each stroke felt eternal, a fragile thread unspooling in time, stretched thin. The layers of color deepened and blended, ochres and reds pulsing softly, vivid beneath the steadily darkening sky. From somewhere deeper, a muted clink sparked through the silence, a stone reluctantly shifting, or perhaps the slow fall of forgotten dust disturbed by the faintest breath. Your muscles stiffened, the air around you folded more tightly, like a whispered warning woven into the dark. The watcher's eyes lingered, glowing faintly with threading through the chamber like silk drawn tight across frozen bones. A delicate tremble stirred through you, at once sharp and slow, a response to an ancient rhythm that defied your understanding. The taste of iron and dry dust coated your tongue, grounding you as you traced the spiral's final curve, reluctant to interrupt the fragile communion. Outside, the vast desert whispered, a slow susurration carried on shifting sands beneath a sky folding into endless dusk. The weight of silence compressed the air, coaxing your breath into slower, deeper cadences, each movement a calculated dance between visibility and concealment. The rough scratches of your cloak against stone mingled with the muted pulse of your heartbeat, forming a quiet chorus in the vast stillness. You allowed your gaze to drift upward, catching the quivering beam of twilight slicing through. A narrow crack in the chamber wall. It slithered softly across the ochres, igniting them with a hesitant glow, the reds deepening in slow flame. That slender shaft of light drew a fragile warmth through the stifling cold, a brief reprieve from the unyielding gloom pressing inward like a tide. The shadow shifted once more, no longer distant, but folding patiently closer, undulating like smoke drawn thin in a slow wind. Your fingers hesitated. The brush held steady, just above the pigments, poised between worlds. The watcher's gaze remained unflinching, a silent challenge cast long and deep, ancient and deliberate. The air quivered, touched again by that muted breath, the slow, deliberate exhale of a presence older than the stone. You felt it brushing close, fingering at the threads of space between you, and though your pulse threatened quickened beats, your hand remained calm, steadying itself with the ritual that had become your anchor. The symbols before you gleamed, faintly, alive in the dying light, weaving secrets to the rhythm of your slowing breaths. Then, as your brush began its final, lingering stroke, the chamber itself seemed to shudder, tiny motes of dust rising in slow arcs, caught in the trembling beam that fractured the dusk. The watcher moved again, deliberate now, unfolding from shadow into form. Its shape was at once familiar and alien, a silhouette carved from absence, poised on the edge of revelation. You could feel the weight of those luminous eyes, piercing through the gloom as they fixed on you with unyielding patience. The breath of the tomb caressed your skin once more, cold and soft, carrying the echo of the desert's endless vigilance. And the watcher stepped just beyond the veil of shadow, a silent, unspoken invitation hanging between you, waiting for the next brushstroke to speak. You held your breath, feeling the weight of those luminous eyes pressing close, like the final note of a long-forgotten song held between trembling fingers. The presence behind you was no longer just profoundly still, carved by the ages into form and silence. The faint glow of its eyes softened, not with threat, but an ancient acknowledgement, a silent communion between past and present, guardian and intruder, bound by shared breath. Your fingers resumed their rhythm, returning to the time-worn spirals with purposeful grace. The pigments beneath your brush deepened, as though the stone itself drank in the colors, awakening dormant protections that pulsed quietly beneath the weathered surface. Each stroke was a pact, every curve a line drawn, not just for preservation, but for a safeguard renewed, a dialogue whispered across millennia. Outside, the desert's last light faded into a seamless dusk, its harsh palette softened to bittersweet hues of purple and amber. The tomb's cold breath rested calm against your skin, a fading shroud that no longer pressed with menace, but wrapped you gently like a tired embrace. The tension in the chamber dissolved slowly, easing as the watcher leaned back into shadow, conceding detente in this delicate moment of coexistence. You stepped back quietly, the coarse fabric of your cloak rustling softly against the stone floor. The palette's rough texture reminded you of every hand that had dared to trace these walls before you, weaving warnings and wisdom into pigment that weathered the relentless passage of time. The ochres and reds glowed faintly in the dim light, casting a warm, living presence across the cold stones. As you approached the narrow entrance, the desert wind whispered through the slit, carrying with it a calming lullaby of shifting sands and fading daylight. The air was cooler now, comforting in its crisp clarity, the stale scent of stone, replaced by the simple purity of the evening breeze. You inhaled deeply, the taste of ancient dust mingling with fresh desert air, a moment suspended between worlds. Behind you, the chamber held its breath no longer. The watcher had retreated fully into the dark, a silent sentinel slipping back into the fabric of stone and shadow. The whispered murmurs had quieted to nothing, the language of curses and protection settling into stillness once more. You felt an unspoken gratitude, a recognition shared in silence, that the balance was preserved. Your steps echoed faintly as you moved toward the tomb's entrance, the sound folding softly into the vastness beyond. With one last glance at the painted spirals, symbols of warning, survival, and ancient secrets, you let the heavy door close gently behind you. It sealed the past away, but in your vivid pulse of those colors and stories remained, a fragile flame flickering quietly against the dark. Outside, the pale moon rose slowly over the desert horizon, casting silver light over endless dunes that curved and stretched like whispered secrets of the earth. The sky unfurled above, vast and tender, cradling stars into their nightly embrace. The silent vastness seemed to breathe with you, a shared exhale after the slow dance of tension within those stone walls. You stood there for a long moment, the cool night air brushing softly against your skin, washing away the lingering weight of centuries. The world was vast and indifferent, but here, in this quiet union of past and present, you found a fragile kind of peace. The desert held its secrets close, but it also held space for endings and for new beginnings. With steady hands, you folded your cloak tighter around your shoulders and set your gaze toward the horizon. The path ahead was uncertain, but you carried with you the slow pulse of ancient wisdom traced carefully onto stone, a legacy woven through time, now resting safely once more. The night wrapped around you like a soft shroud, the cool darkness humming a lullaby older than memory. A gentle calm settled deep in your bones, blending with the fading echoes of whispered breaths and painted spirals. Your eyelids grew heavy, the long day's tension unraveling into quiet serenity as the desert's endless night embraced you fully. And there, beneath a quilt of stars, the world held its soft breath, inviting you to rest, to dream, and to drift gently into the peaceful night that awaited beyond the tomb's cold embrace.